I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. And joining me is the president and the CEO of the Silver Institute, Mike DiRienzo. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we get to have you on generally about once a quarter as we take a look at the overall silver market.
Hmm.
You guys just had a news release out in early November with regards to the silver demand drivers, and it looks like demand is going to go up substantially in the next over the next decade.
Yeah, we think the total demand is definitely going to increase. We're going to, especially on the industrial demand side. Yeah, but globally this year is it's going to ease by about 10%, and that's really just because of lower investment, physical investment, jewelry and silverware demand, and physical investment are going to somewhat have a lower year this year in 2023. But that said, it's still going to be really the number will be elevated by historical standards. The 2023 figure will be the second highest in our metals focus series that dates back 10 years. So yeah, there's some really good signs there. But we're going to see a small drop in jewelry and silverware and physical investment.
Yeah, you the report itself lists three key areas where the demand growth was going to be driven. Silverware was one, jewelry was another, and then the industrial demand. The one that surprised me was the silverware because I'm picturing knives and forks, and I can't think of anybody that uses pure silverware out there. But off mic, we were talking about that. So enlighten me and my listeners as to what the category of silverware actually encompasses and where this increase in demand is coming from.
Sure. Well, the increase in demand took place primarily in 2022. Literally had a banner year of about 73 million ounces, the highest in our series dating back to 2013 at least. And silverware, well, yes, it does include tableware and so forth, but it also includes artifacts, silver jars, silver bar, silver pins, whatever would not be used as silverware, meaning knives and forks and spoons, comes under the category of silverware. And ironically, on page 61 of our current World Silver Survey, we do have two examples of Indian silverware. And one looks to be like a big jar, and the other is a table artifact made of silver. So that's where that category is derived from. It's yes, it is the silverware, the things that we use to eat, the utensils, but it's also artifacts, art objects, like I said, bowls and so forth that people would either display on a coffee table or give as a gift.
I see. Yeah, this, as I say, I had a pretty narrow focus on what that category actually meant. You mentioned jewelry as part of that, and India seems to be a big driver in both those categories. There seems to be a lot of increased demand in India for silver jewelry and silverware. Is that the main reason for the demand increase?
Yeah, so India really paved the way in 2022, according to our April release of the World Silver Survey. Just a banner year. You'll recall all the imports of silver that were coming into that country, and which really fell into three buckets: investment, jewelry, and silverware. And we think that it's not all said and done yet, but silver jewelry and demand for silverwares will probably fall by 22% on the jewelry side and nearly 50% on the silverware side, and that's all being led by India, which had a just a monstrous surge in 2022. But if you were to exclude India, jewelry demand would actually edge slightly higher, and silverware would only fall by about 12%. So, taking India out of the category, the markets look good.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, I look at it in this way: the gold reached record highs again last week. We're recording this on December the 8th. They've fallen off somewhat, but I look at silver, as it's been described in the past, as poor man's gold. And when gold is that high and the proportion of, the ratio, the gold silver ratio is as high as it is, um, is is that a factor in driving this extra demand? Meaning that India is typically a poorer country.
Mm-hmm.
Their residents maybe can't afford the gold jewelry and the gold wear. Therefore, they're I don't want to say settling, but they're choosing silver as the alternative. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely. And, that's just not germane to the country of India. But taking India, for example, yeah, the price point in rupee terms with respect to gold and silver, it's much more affordable to buy silver. And whether that's jewelry or silverwares or indeed silver investment uh, bars and coins. So there's no question about it. People are making decisions based on their disposable income and what they can afford. They want exposure to precious metals, silver, and they find they can get more for their dollar.
Yeah, it's the dollar definitely goes a lot further in the silver, and realistically, there's probably a bigger upside to the silver market than there is to the gold market at this point. With silver, as it usually does, it tends to lag behind until the very end, and then it takes off like a scalded cat. So,
Absolutely,
um,
it just explodes. And ironically, I was at an event in New York yesterday, a conference, and that seemed to be the theme of the silver versus gold markets. And there were a lot of questions about why didn't silver react in the same way gold did. Um, but if you look at the movements, the intraday movements of the price of gold and silver during that week long 8 day trading day surge for gold, silver actually had a pretty good run too on a percentage basis. Okay, if you look at the percent that gold increased versus the percent that silver increased, they were really neck and neck. Now that's coming off of a small figure for silver when you're looking at 2,100 gold and a little over 25 silver. Um, and we both metals have come down, but on a percentage basis, uh, silver performed as well as gold did. The problem was that this was all being fueled by gold, all being fueled by the dollar, all being fueled obviously by thoughts and hopes that the Fed will continue to pause interest rate hikes and may indeed even start cutting interest rates in early 2024.
yeah, those would be pretty true statements. It's as I say, it's all very interesting. And one other thing to note when it comes to wealth in India, um, families tend to wear their wealth. They tend to wear their gold and their silver around their necks as opposed to hiding it away in bars and coins. So they're still surprised that they would be leading the way for the jewelry and the silverware areas. Now, before we step and go forward into the industrial end of the silver market, what percentage of the demand does the jewelry and the silverware markets actually make up for the silver?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, of course, it's all being driven right now by industrial demand. Takes up well over 50% of global demand for silver is led by silver's use in industry. And we break that down in our survey with respect to electrical and electronics, photovoltaics, brazing alloys and solders. And then we get into the other industrial category, which could consist of silver's use in healthcare applications, and such. But from a percentage basis, if you look at last year, overall demand was about 1.2 billion ounces. Uh, Industrial took up the lion's share of that. Physical investment came in second, at about 332 million ounces. And then you had jewelry at about 234, silverware at about 73, and then, of course, photography lagging behind at about 27.5 million ounces. So I would put those in the order of industrial, investment, jewelry, silverware, and then photography.
Yeah, that seems fair. Now let's touch on the industrial. It would look like the increase in the demand is going to come from two sources that are different but related. They're all part of that green energy movement. And it looks like the real drivers to the industrial demand increases for silver's use in solar panels and silver's use in electric vehicles.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So when you're looking at those two categories alone, uh, about 187 to 190 million ounces will be put into the photovoltaics category this year. It's quite remarkable. I mean, if you look at our World Silver Survey and you look at the fact that we have we don't even really look at photo. Well, we do. In 2014, about 48 million ounces of silver was used in photovoltaics. And like I said earlier, about 187 to 190 million ounces in this year, 2023. And that's projected to cross the 200 million ounce marker in 2024 to about 210 or 215 million ounces. So that being the case, it has really become one of the largest, if not the largest, demand driver for silver with respect to its industrial uses.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me as well. Like I take a look at those two categories, and I live in a small city on Prince Edward Island, just off the east coast of Canada. And in
Mm-hmm.
my neighborhood, in the past year, there's been at least 8 to 10 houses that I could walk to in 5 minutes that have added solar panels to the roof of their houses. And I can think of one of my neighbors that have bought an electric vehicle. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that, the real key to the demand drivers is on the industrial side is going to be these solar panels rather than electric vehicles, and that it seems to be getting a better level of adoption rather than the electric vehicles.
Yeah,
Am I
well,
right?
you're absolutely right. There's no question about it. But we always have to remember that countries, the world is focused primarily today on reducing its reliance on fossil fuels. Will they ever get there completely? I doubt it. But silver is going to play a large role in expanding these uses in clean energy applications. You mentioned electric vehicles. You know, as I think we have an 11% increase in the United States in sales of electric vehicles through the third quarter of this year. And as these cars become more complex, they're going to require more and more silver to operate the vehicle. Silver is not used in the battery, we know that, but it is used extensively in the contacts and the infotainment systems and other electrification aspects of a modern electric vehicle. So we put out a report a few years ago, and we may have actually underballed the amount of silver that will be consumed by 2025. We said about 90 million ounces. That may even be 95 or 100 million ounces of silver in these vehicles. And that component alone, and that's clean energy vehicles, hybrid and electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, definitely. Hybrids, I see more and more hybrids popping up everywhere. So that's definitely going to continue to drive things on the vehicle market side of things. Now, we can't talk about green energy and green technology without addressing the elephant in the room, which is China.
Mhm.
China controls a lot of the electric vehicle market and a lot of the solar panel markets. And trade between China and the West is becoming increasingly less and less friendly over the years. And
Mhm.
if we continue down that pathway, I see a bifurcation of the economies where there'll be an Eastern China economy and a Western, you know, economy. And I wonder what you think that's going to do to silver demand. Is that going to increase it as the economies kind of split and separate, or will it still just simply remain the same and be less efficient?
Well, I mean, look at, I mean, China and the United States operate independent of themselves with respect to their industrial production. Uh, I don't think anybody is convinced that China is out of the weeds from their industrial capacity. Look at their GDP numbers, and they're forecast to be lower than they have been historically in the last decade. But that being said, China is a huge consumer of silver. They're the world's second largest producer of silver. The United States is a top 10 producer of silver, but we consume more silver than anybody. So look at it. These countries will act independently with respect to their silver consumption. And one of the great things about the report that we put out, the World Silver Survey, is we do break these demand buckets down by country. So if a user or a reader wants to get an idea of like what did China do last year with respect to industrial demand, they would just go to our World Silver Survey, and they would be able to see that that the leader last year was. Let me just look at this real quick here. The leader last year was China. Okay, for industrial demand, followed by the United States. Um, but when you look at all overall demand, those countries are really, one or two in different categories as you go down the list. So look, it's intriguing. I think China has more challenges than the United States does right now. But that being said, um, they're going full bore ahead, and I don't anticipate any major changes in their industrial output to the negative side.
No. So to summarize everything, we're looking at the demand drivers increasing the silver demand by 42% over the next decade. And it's coming from those three areas: industrial, jewelry, and silverware. That 42%, that's double over the last decade. So there's going to be a lot of demand for silver, which should put a bid under the silver price and drive prices up. Now, to offset that demand, we're going to either need new mines. But the question I wonder is how much of that demand could become being from areas where at current pricing the silver isn't economical, but at $30-$35 an ounce it becomes economical. Are we facing a potential supply and demand gap that can't be fed without?
Yeah, but the thing is that we have a lot of above ground stocks of silver, right? And at what price point does that need to be mobilized? At what price point, from a miner's perspective, do they start exploring on existing properties or spending the capital investment to go to other regions to explore for more silver? It's a question that is quite vexing. We're actually in a market deficit right now. It'll be the third year in a row of those deficits for the silver market. But the demand right now is being met by the supply of above ground stocks. And we have a chapter on that in our World Silver Survey. But, you know, there are people who say, oh, we're going to run out of silver. Well, not today, okay? And maybe not in the next 5 to 10 years. But the question is the silver requirements to meet these goals of the various countries with respect to reducing the load of fossil fuels and using clean energy sources could put a strain on the market. You could have greater deficits going forward, but it really does become a question of price. At what price are these stocks drawn down?
Okay, well, that's definitely good to hear. I've been talking with numerous people in the battery and critical metals area, and one of the things that seemed to be a common theme was that there was a supply gap to fit the demand going forward that was going to be problematic. And I'm hearing you say that not necessarily the case for the silver market.
Right, that's very, very true. And then you got to couple that also with this is, I think, the third year in a row where we're going to have a reduction in mine supply. Okay, so we addressed that in our interim press release that we put out on November 15th, but we think it's going to fall by about 2% this year. And that's all going to be driven by lower output in Mexico and Peru. Um, and those two countries are facing very, very extreme geopolitical issues in those countries, and strikes and so forth. So look at more demand, lower silver production. Uh, I don't know where we're going to be with respect to scrap supply. Last year we actually had an increase in scrap supply, but it was very small. Scrap supply, recycling, as we like to call it, uh, back in the day was really driven by photography way back in the day. So you look at early 2000, the 1991, 1999. But these days, it was swept up by when the gold price got to a certain amount, people swept up their gold, the silver came along with it, and they recycled that. With signs at various stores, at establishments across the country, we buy gold. I haven't seen those. They even at $2,100 gold, I haven't seen those signs. They exist, and there are adverts for it, but nonetheless, my suspicion is that on the recycling side, we're going to remain steady. With respect to mine production, we're going to go from 837 million ounces to a forecasted 820 million ounces, okay, in 2023. That's about a 2% reduction. We're not seeing any official sector sales. We see a little bit in some countries, but not like we did way back when with China. That issue is pretty much done. We're seeing very low, a much lower hedge book. So we don't see any supply coming to the market from there this year. But obviously, the big daddy is mine production, and that's a 2% reduction in mine supply. So it grew from 2021 to 2022, but rather modestly. But we do think it's going to drop this year.
Perfect. You guys put out regular reports. You also put out a monthly newsletter. You guys have excellent supply and demand data that investors and people that are interested in the silver market should be reading on a regular basis. How do they follow the works of the Silver Institute?
Oh, there's many ways. You can get on our mailing list, and it's not mail; it's all done by email these days. By going to our website and subscribing to Silver News. Along with that, you'll get our press releases. So we have you're right. We have a bi-monthly publication called Silver News. It is a compendium of interesting stories in the silver market, and that could be related to nanotechnology, health, mining technologies, new uses of silver. And I think it's quite interesting. We also translate that into Chinese and into Spanish. You can follow us on Twitter at Silver Institute, and we have a dedicated LinkedIn page as well. So we have a very, very active social media program. We're putting out on average about 2 posts per week on various aspects of what the work the Silver Institute is doing, highlights from our publications and so forth. And, we'll be putting out the World Silver Survey next April of 2024. But before then, we have a couple of reports that we have getting ready to go. We may get one out here in December on factors that determine the silver price. We have one in January on silver and the energy transition, and that's going to look at solar, EV, wind, and nuclear as well, because silver is used in those two applications. And then throughout the year, we do these market trend reports. We did one earlier this year on the Indian silver market. We're going to be doing one on the factors that determine the silver price. And next year, we're going to look at issues like bullion stocks. How are those stocks mobilized? When are they mobilized? And so forth, as well as a really in-depth look at silver bullion demand, a coin and bar form on a countrywide basis. So, yeah, simply go to our website, sign up for our information, follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, or just simply give me a call, and I'll be happy to chat with anyone.
Perfect. I look forward to having you back on as those reports get put out so we can discuss them more in depth. And best of the holiday season to you and your family.
Same to you. I really appreciate the time, Michael, and we'll chat soon.
You bet. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
The Prospector News podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.